Oi, what's the best game where you get to eat pie? What's the best game where you play a dead guy? Aye, you'll find out in VG247's podcast. Here, what's the best game where you swing from a rope? And what's the best game where you batter the Pope? Sesame Street 2. Like I said, you will find out in this here podcast. Hello and welcome to VG247's Best Games Ever podcast, where we attempt to find the best game within a specific category. For example, this week we want to find the best game that you hate for a very specific reason. It could be absolutely anything. Crusader Kings 3, for example. Some people might object to that game entirely on the basis that it arguably glorifies the concept of hereditary monarchy. And if you had strong Republican leanings, you would find that understandably quite distasteful. Speaking of creaking old institutions that are inexplicably popular, I'm joined today by Editor-in-Chief Tom Orry. How you doing, Tom?
All right, my popularity has waned, to be fair.
How's that? How are you measuring your popularity?
Well, it's Twitter. I mean, it's all I've got to go on, really. I mean, it's less than it was.
The Follow VG Tom Orr campaign has been trundling along for years now.
It hasn't really worked, that campaign.
Okay. Well, I mean, look, you're very popular with the podcast audience. I keep getting messages about how they love your deadpan delivery on absolutely everything, regardless of how you feel. Very hard to read. We're also joined by Associate Editor Alex and Guides Editor James. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm still smarting from my last appearance, where I lost on the basis that MGS2 doesn't control very well. So a game on the Nintendo 64, a console with a Rube Goldberg machine as a controller. So I'm feeling slighted and vengeful. Thank you.
I'm in a perpetual state of annoyance. So that's just me.
I mean, you ask four sort of middle-aged men to hate something for performatively on a podcast. You're going to get so much material, aren't you? Okay, let's kick off with. Tom's pick is. I'm really interested to find the reason for this one, Tom. What have you picked?
Well, before I give you the pick, there's got a little story. So,
right, okay.
Let's say I was 15. I haven't looked at the dates, so I don't know how old I was. Let's say I was 15. I'm at home. I'm like, oh, games are cool, aren't they? They're great. I love games. I love reading about games. They're brilliant. And there's a postcard comes to the letterbox. What could it be? Oh, this looks exciting. It's a really fancy bit of graphics on that. What this game? Oh, Final Fantasy VII. That looks great. There's wonderful graphics on the postcard. That must be what the game looks like. Exactly like this postcard advertising this game. They can't be mis-selling it at all, can they? So yeah, that Final Fantasy VII, piece of shit. Yeah. The reason I hate it though, other than the fact that they completely... I mean, these days they probably get done by trading standards, advertising, whatever, because you can't.
I'm just going to say, Tom, they did get done at a later date in the UK. I think it was probably around Final Fantasy X, where they were told they had to start putting not gameplay footage on the TV ads.
Yeah, there we go. I was ahead of the game with my dislike of this. Anyway, so that postcard, which was a very nice postcard, convinced me to buy Final Fantasy VII on the PlayStation. But I mean, I got over that part of it. The reason I hate the game is that I got stuck on disc 1 on I don't even know what it was called. It was like some kind of fairground or some shit in the sky. Alex will know what this is. Like a
saucer.
Saucer. I could not get off this saucer, and therefore from that point onwards, despite the fact that I kind of enjoyed it to that point and the chocobos and everything else, I now hate Final Fantasy and all Final Fantasy games.
So hang on, let's pinpoint this a second. So you went to the Gold Saucer. I'm guessing you went down to the prison because you talked about chocobos, and then back up. You did the chocobo racing.
Yeah, done the racing.
And then you couldn't get out of the Gold Saucer after that.
Something like that, yeah. I remember being stuck on this saucer. I was like, there's a whole load with so many discs to go. And it's like, we must be able to get past this saucer. And I was like, nah, couldn't do it. And that's it. And I bought the game again years later, thinking I'll give this another go. Never even tried it. Never put it back in the disc. Put the disc in the machine. I just couldn't bring myself to.
Have you played the remake, Tom? Or are you still smarting from
No, haven't played the remake.
There's no Gold Saucer in the remake yet, to be fair. So Tom
I do plan to giving it a go because they've got rid of all the nonsense battle stuff, haven't they? And that's
you still got to do fights.
Stupid map that's like, oh, it's got 3D map and you wander around and then you get something's attacked you. randomly because you moved an inch.
I tell you what, that is the reason why I could never get through Final Fantasy VII. I cannot like stand just being constantly interrupted when you're trying to find something. So that entire game is just an exercise in just being irritated. I got stuck trying to beat the Materia Keeper in that mountain. And,
That's a hard boss, to be fair.
Yeah, and
Is that on disc 1 or not?
I think that's
That
disc
is
1.
disc
Yeah.
one, yeah.
And I
I
remember
got stuck too. I got stuck on that boss, that hard boss.
You just got lost.
Got stuck.
I remember like
You got the amazing
just
thing is you
remembered
got
it now when it was
you
that
got
boss.
lost and quit in an area where there's no random encounters.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why I got stuck. I wish I could remember more clearly why it happened, but I just remember in my mind it's the saucer, and I was like, not really annoyed that I'd spent money on it. I couldn't get off this thing. I knew there was a lot more to come because it was multiple discs, right? So I knew there was a load more game.
That's not even. I would say not even halfway through disc 1.
Exactly. So who knows? Had they designed this game better, I might have liked it more. I mean, that's the way it is, really.
it just you're going around. Oh no, I can't find the door.
Yeah, I have got. To be fair, I have history with this with doors.
It's not even a door though,
like,
Tom. It's a cable car that you take. So it's
Silent
like
Hill.
a big blue cable car.
Well, it probably had a door, right? Silent Hill 4, The Room. For a long time, I played that game and I was convinced myself that the whole game was set in that room because I couldn't get out of the room.
That's why it's called The Room.
I know. So I in my mind, it wasn't until quite a while later that I saw there was a whole game aside from this room. Playing Rainbow Six 3 on
Doesn't
the
that have a
Xbox.
lot of door-based gameplay?
And I used to play it online quite a lot, and all my people I played with used to take the piss out of me because I would like creak the doors open because it was a mechanic. Then you could push it really slowly, and they'd be like, "Open the fucking door!" And I'm creaking it open to see because someone might be on the other side of this door.
Yeah.
So I've got a problem with doors.
What's your favorite
That's
band?
definitely specific.
That is quite specific. So you got to a place and you couldn't find your way out.
Probably because of a door.
Like as I say, I found Final Fantasy VII an incredibly difficult experience, and lots of people talk like it was one of these because it's like the it's the Final Fantasy game that everyone loves, and it's what brought sort of JRPGs to the West really, and made them like obscenely popular over here, and because it's like got this sci-fi setting, a lot of people have told me over the years like, oh, you should really play it, you'd love it. It was really up your street actually. And then when I eventually did, I hated every second. As being constantly interrupted. When I got to the Materia Keeper, and it was my first sort of real experience of this in RPGs. I said to a friend who was well into this stuff, and he's like, "Oh no, you're not leveled up enough to do that yet. You have to go and grind a bit." I was like, "Oh, well, do the one thing that's been fucking annoying me all this time." No, absolutely not. No,
The thing, you are right. It's like a quirk of this genre. It's like I'm really glad that Pokemon games have started to get a little bit shorter because that they have the same problem. The thing that someone like you, who would probably enjoy the setting and the story of that game, the modern re-releases of these games where they've got the fast forward, and they've even got like you click in the right analog stick and the left analog stick at the same time, and it just makes your character super powerful temporarily.
Mm-hmm.
It allows you to just sort of, if you hit a brick wall like that, you can just sort of punch through it.
Yeah.
And the fast forward, especially, I think, even as someone who loves those games, I struggle to play old RPGs now that don't have auto battle and fast forward. Mm-hmm. Auto battle is where when you get trash mobs, it just automatically hits the normal attack button for you, so you can just blitz through them, and then you can turn it off for the battles that are actually
I mean, having an entire like cruise control option for playing the game, it kind of admits that it's a bit rubbish, right?
This is why when like people are really upset right now that Final Fantasy 16 is an action game, it's basically like a Devil May Cry style game with an RPG layer on top, and a lot of the hardcore RPG nerds are really, really fucking upset. And I understand the upset, but you can't release a game that is like that. This is the thing that Pokemon are slowly realizing. Like their battles are becoming more dynamic and less like molasses.
It's what we were talking about the other week. We've got this convergence of genres now. Like everything's everything's slightly an RPG, everything's slightly an action game, and like I love it because I love RPGs and stuff for the exploration aspect and the sense of kind of being in a world, you know.
The interesting thing about the remake is it's as a battle system, it's fascinating because it takes loads of lessons from things like The Witcher and even things like Elder Scrolls, but at its core, Elder Scrolls is more like structurally a little bit, or it's a bit BioWare-y as well in some of the structure on some of the chapters.
Mm-hmm.
But at its core, that combat system, still, at any time you press a button and it slows down, and you know how in Mass Effect, you hold the bumper or whatever and it brings up all the powers and combat goes in slow-mo so you have time to pick a power.
Mm-hmm.
They do that, but when you press the button, what comes up is the traditional menu.
Oh, right, okay.
In exactly the same format, so you can sort of go in and so it's got that. And for people who, like in Japan, this is a big thing, right? People aren't comfortable with action games. They've made it so that literally there's a mode that you can flick on where the action bit of the game plays itself, so you can just do the commands, which is sort of crazy.
That's insane.
But yeah, it's a really good sort of melding in the remake of those.
I feel like I should play the remake now, maybe to get over, like, I can't tell you how much I detested the original. Now, like, my partner played the remake, and it's not really her sort of game, but she loves BioWare stuff.
It's very BioWare.
She really liked the remake, but her main feedback was, really liked that, haven't got a fucking clue what happened in it.
Well, the problem is we are far enough out from release, right? The problem is
don't spoil it.
I'm not going to spoil it outright in detail.
Don't.
But
I knew I should never pick Final Fantasy.
The problem with the problem with the remake is it is not just a remake. There is more going on, and the deeper into the game you get, the more it begins to diverge away from the original story in a way that you, Jim, as a sci-fi person, will probably find really interesting.
Yeah, probably.
In that Star Trek-y mirror universe, what happens if butterfly effect if one thing changes, what happens down the timeline, what does it mean, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think I should.
Good.
But you know what? It's bringing me back to that sort of like, oh, it's really good. Sci-fi, and it's got a cyberpunk sort of steampunk city in it. You'll love it. It's got a guy with an arm for a gun. Like, you love that sort of stuff. And then I played it and I hated it.
That's the lie, even about the original Final Fantasy VII. It's a game that has a sci-fi city, and it's got one core sci-fi concept running underneath it. But the wonderful thing about the game is that's about a third of the game. And then you exit that city, and you go into like traditional JRPG towns and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad I never finished it. It sounds horrendous. James. What is your... I mean, God, the JRPGs are getting a kick in today. What is your pick for us?
And the kicking will continue. to talk about some games that came out after I was 4 years old for a little bit. I noticed that you called me middle-aged in there at the start as well.
I did think, look, for the sake of brevity, I had to, but like just to clarify, James is not middle-aged like the rest of us.
Anyway, the difficulty with these topics is always the best games part, right? Because I hate a lot of very bad games for very specific reasons. And, well, to divert straight away from bad games and into good games again, when I think about games that I hate irrationally, my mind goes straight to The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, because it's just so much worse than Oblivion in every single way. But that's not my choice today, because there are such myriad of different reasons that it's not a very specific one. However, for a double dose of very specific, my choice today is Persona 4 Golden, that I hate for the very specific reason that you can throw away dozens of hours of gameplay on a very specific conversation, and then the game just finishes. It gives you the middle finger, and you have to start again. And that is why I hate Persona 4 Golden. It's a brilliant game. I've got loads of merch. I've got the insert coin clothes. I've got all of that sort of stuff. It's a brilliant game. But what were they thinking that if you don't work in the corner shop enough, the game just finishes?
The amazing thing as well is, so hang on. Are you talking about, I need to clarify this. I'm not going to say any spoilers, but are you talking about the bit where the ending branches, or are you talking about the bit where also if you haven't done certain things enough, you can just lock yourself out of the golden content?
Take your pick. They're both extremely
I
stupid.
was going to say, the astonishing thing about the latter is that the same fucking thing happens in Persona 5 Royal. They did it again.
They don't. The Persona 5 is its whole own kettle of fish. The world's longest game. The whole Persona. I'm happy to be crucified and then burnt at the stake for this. Because I've already said that I do really, really like the Persona series, but it strikes me as of all of the really beloved JRPG series, there are an interestingly large amount of things about it that are just terrible. Like we've already talked about the battle system in like turn-based battle systems, that they're kind of a holdover from development restrictions that just don't exist anymore. But for some reason, we've just got to have the things that were in the old ones, not because they were good, but because they were in the old ones. So you just have to do the same. You have to battle the same bloke over and over again 1,000 times. Yeah, the personas are all awful. But yeah, the very specific reason that I don't like it is that you can just chuck out 60, 70 hours of gameplay based on say
the wrong decision. Yeah,
wrong conversation decision. And yeah,
that sounds like I haven't played Persona, but my how I'm relating to this is having spent a youth playing a lot of point and click adventure games. And back in the early days, before they figured out to design these things for human beings to play, like a lot of Sierra were particularly bad for this. You would have games where you would have one chance in the first act of the game to get an object, to get an item that was crucial for a later part of the game that might be like right at the end, like 10 hours later. And there was never any indication that this was the case. And then you get to that part of the game, there's no way to go back. And like, oh, you forgot to pick up a snow globe. Sorry, that's it now.
Well, imagine if in Mass Effect you were given a choice, and rather than those choices leading to broadly the same place, one of those choices just rolls credits and you miss out on like 10 hours of the game. That is what can happen in Persona, where basically the path to the true ending is there's a decision that you make.
Yeah.
And in the game's defense, I will say this. I think it's very clear the decision the narrative expects you to make and wants you to make. To put it bluntly, the narrative doesn't expect you to want to commit murder, even if the person in question is a horrible piece of shit. But if you do decide to exact vengeance, you end up going straight to credits and missing, I would say it's probably about 6-7 hours of gameplay, right? You miss a whole dungeon.
Yeah, there's an entire dungeon at the end. I think that's the second. I think there's an earlier branch. There is a less, there's an even more inconsequential conversation that you can mess up, and then it just rolls credits. It just fast forwards the last 4 months of the game.
Did you know at the time that you'd missed a load of game? Or did you just think it finished?
Someone could totally finish that game in that way, in the event that I just described. I don't know about the one that James said, the one that James talking about, but with the one that I just described, you could totally, if you didn't have the internet or whatever, you could finish the game and be like, wow, that's a real bummer of an ending.
Yeah. So that's the second branch where you can kind of go between like the kind of normal and the golden and the true ending and that sort of stuff. Yeah. There is a specific bad ending, and I think you can branch to a bad ending after you've kind of solved the mystery. But you can fail to solve the mystery on the basis of one conversation, and then it ends completely incongruously. Your character just kind of goes, "I'm going home now," and then that's the end. That's the end of the game. Start again, please.
I mean, Far Cry 4 did that, but at least it had the decency to put it right at the start of the game. With Pagan Min going, "Look, if you just wait here, I'll sort everything out." And then you wait here, and then 5 minutes later, he comes back having sorted everything out, and then the credits roll, which is honestly the best way to play Far Cry 4, because you avoid having to actually play it. But yeah, I mean, that sounds incredibly frustrating. But just to clarify, you do like Persona 4 Golden.
Oh yeah, but one of the reasons why it's so annoying and why it's so hateable is that the the whole basis of Persona is, and why it is a brilliant series, is that you through the conversations that you have, through the characters that you meet, and this kind of life that you build in a small town over the course of the game is so kind of compelling, and you enjoy talking and speaking and building relationships with these people. And then completely incongruously, based on some seemingly inconsequential decisions, your character just decides, none of that happened, I'm going home now, see you later. And then and then months go by, and then that's it. It just seems like an absolutely mad decision.
I think that's when actually you realise that you fucked up. Is that so? The game Persona works on a day-to-day schedule, so every day, so every night you go to sleep and then you watch the calendar move across a day, and it shows you the weather for that day and the things going on, and then you play that day. And I think that's when you realise you fucked up, is when it fades to black and you watch the calendar go because you're zooming past months, and you're like, hang on, is this meant to be happening?
I'm really glad you guys warned me about this, because I was gonna play this when it was added to. Is it already on Game Pass, or is it coming to Game Pass?
It's coming to, yeah.
Yeah, it was one of the ones I was like, oh, I'll try that out, and now I'm thinking, I'm glad I've been warned about that, so I'm pre-warned, or I'm just thinking I won't bother. It sounds a bit stressful.
Yeah,
it's a great game, to be fair.
Yeah, it's a fantastic game, and once you know you can so utterly fail, you can. There are plenty of kind of spoiler-free stuff that you can. Which kind of social links to max out and who to speak to and what you have to do to unlock like the, in inverted commas, best ending or whatever.
Yeah.
But back in, I don't know, 2010 or whenever I played it, it was that wasn't so much of a thing. So it was just like, you didn't work in the corner shop enough. You didn't work, you fool, you absolute melon. You should have worked in the corner shop. You great. Yeah, cool. Guess I'll work in the corner shop for 70 hours next time.
I mean, it's a great commentary on how our life choices can mess us up, isn't it? I was going to... that would have been a good intro for you, Tom. Alex, what have you got for us? I'm very interested in this one, because is it about the lead actor?
Yes. So my choice is, I said before we started, right, this is quite a short one. I usually have a big, long story. I'm a James Bond fan. I think the pantheon of Bond games is interesting. There's good ones, there's shit ones. EA, over the years, when they held the license, had a really interesting character arc as a company, in the sense that they made some absolute shockers, and they were making like real scraping the bottom of the barrel stuff, where they made that, not the GoldenEye remake, because that was Activision, but GoldenEye Rogue Agent, where you played as a villain in the Bond universe, and it was called GoldenEye even though it had nothing to do with GoldenEye. It was called GoldenEye because the protagonist had a golden eye. Yeah. But the only reason the protagonist had a golden eye was because they wanted to call the game GoldenEye to evoke the N64 game to try and sell copies.
Yeah.
So EA made all this shit. They made some ones that I think some people really rate. Like I see people all the time like talk about it was called Agent Under Fire. Yeah, and Nightfire, but I think they were relatively crappy FPS games.
They were 6 out of 10 as fuck,
mediocre FPS games.
Yeah.
But then they made Everything or Nothing, which was this third person action game. Sort of, people will not be pleased with this description, but I think it's fair. Sort of like an Uncharted before an Uncharted.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Where, it's got sections where you're on foot third person and you're shooting. It's got gadgets. It's got little mini games. It's got driving sections.
Isn't it on the driving sections in the Need for Speed engine as well?
Yeah.
I'm sure I've heard that.
It was like that total thing of EA bringing all their technology together. So they made that, and that was a Pierce Brosnan game. So they had the likeness of Pierce Brosnan, and they had Jaws back from the Roger Moore films and all that sort of stuff. They had a lot of fun with it. And they also used to cast celebrities in roles and do their face scans, which was fun. Then I think they hit a weird scenario where Brosnan was leaving the role of Bond. Daniel Craig hadn't been cast yet, and they wanted to make another game. So they were like, right, let's make a game with an old Bond. Obviously, they want to make a game with Sean Connery. So they make a game with Sean Connery. So they do a retelling of From Russia with Love, where basically they retool that story in really interesting ways to sort of make it a video game, but also bring it more in line with modern Bond. So there's more action scenes. They use the jetpack from Thunderball, and they use the Aston from Goldfinger with all the gadgets, because obviously none of that was in From Russia with Love. That was the second Bond film that was really down to earth, where what constituted a gadget was a briefcase with a button and you pressed it and a hidden knife slid out. You know, that was what constituted a gadget in From Russia with Love.
I've got a knife in my shoe.
Yeah, so they there was the shoe knives as well. So they retooled it. And they, much the same as I wrote this article on VG247, praising the Goldeneye remake. They got Bruce Furstein, who is the guy who wrote some of the screenplays or some of the story treatments for Brosnan's films, to come and do the writing. And they got back, like, I'm pretty sure the soundtrack is by David Arnold as well, or one of his proteges. So they did all this wonderful stuff. And the problem is, and the reason I hate the game, even though it's really good and cannot play it, is that they cast Sean Connery as James Bond. And he's awful. It's really sad. It's really sad, because you've got this 75-year-old man returning to this role. So this is his 8th and final performance as James Bond.
Yeah.
And he's returning to the role that made him. And I think for Bond fans, the fact that he was returning to the role in any sense was quite a big deal, because he had quite a big falling out with the producer behind Bond, Cubby Broccoli, before when he left the role. And Cubby died, and his daughter is now in charge of the Bond franchise, and he never made amends with them on that. So it was things like, I think they talked about having Connery back to play when there's the housekeeper of Bond's family home in Daniel Craig film Skyfall. I think, and that's in Scotland. I think they have admitted that they thought about having Connery as that, but he wouldn't have anything to do with them, which is real sad. But he returned for this video game, and he talked about it in really glowing terms. He talked about how video games were an up-and-coming form. He talked about how he took the role because his grandkids really enjoy video games, were really avid video game players. But it doesn't change the fact that you've got this 75-year-old geezer trying to sound like he's 28 again. And he just sounds awful and knackered in every single scene. And it's not helped by the fact that they have a bunch of other actors who they bring back, but because they're deceased, so like Desmond Llewellyn playing Q, and Robert Shaw, who's the big henchman bloke, the lady who played Rosa Klebb, and I don't know if the guy who played M back in those days in it, but they have all those guys in it, but they're all dead. So they recast them with sound-alikes, and they sound great. But so you've got this scene where you've got Desmond Llewellyn's face and an incredibly good impression of Desmond Llewellyn playing opposite Sean Connery in a new scene that you haven't seen before, which feels wonderful as a Bond fan.
Sean Connery doing a shit impression of Sean Connery.
But Sean Connery sounds absolutely terrible. Yeah. And it brings to mind, like, it really ruins the game, and it's sad because it's a great game, it's a great follow-up to Everything or Nothing, but it's such a bummer to hear on so many different levels. And it brings to mind, like, just recast the role. Like, there's that deceptively good Scarface game that was on PS2, Xbox, and Wii.
Yeah.
And that Scarface game, they signed Al Pacino on, and they got him in, and he started doing the voice. And the directors of the game were like, your voice has changed too much. And so then what they did was Al Pacino went and found someone that he thought was going to be good to sound like young him. So they went and got him to give his blessing and pick the guy. And lo and behold, the guy they cast in Scarface, I think it's called The World Is Yours, that first game, is excellent. You wouldn't be able to tell it isn't young Pacino. And that's what they probably should have done with Connery, but instead you've got absolutely ancient Connery sounding just really sad and really
knackered. And I mean, funnily enough, the same thing happens quite the exact phenomenon you're talking about, the Back to the Future Telltale games. Where you've got a Michael J. Fox sound-alike who sounds really good, indistinguishable from Michael J. Fox, certainly in terms of video game acting, and opposite a Christopher Lloyd who is actually Christopher Lloyd and just sounds decades removed from his original performance. It's meant to be like only weeks later as well. And like the quality of his voice is, I don't know. Right, this is going to sound mental, but his mouth sounds too dry.
No, and it's not like EA didn't know any better either, because around the same time they did that Godfather game, and they did a bunch of recording with Marlon Brando, who was on death's door, and they got the recordings and were like, we can't use these. Even though he was on death's door. I mean, admittedly, he then died, so they didn't have to tell him they weren't going to use his stuff. But they did ultimately recast it. And then because it was a big deal that he was reading some lines as Don Corleone again, they at least included his recordings as like bonus stuff. But I just, it's so funny because obviously if you choose to do that, you choose to do what they chose to do here, which is to remake a beloved film with a beloved actor and really mine the nostalgia. Probably the worst thing you could do to undermine yourself is have this weird, uncanny, and some actors, right, age and can continue to use their voice in the same way. I think, Jim, you and I both like Doctor Who, and I think a Big Finish, for whatever reason, all those old guys are all quite
for some reason. Colin Baker now still sounds a lot like Colin Baker then. And which gives him a chance to do some good Doctor Who, which he never got a chance to on the telly.
But for whatever reason, Connery couldn't do that. And it's like, was it because he was too old? Was it because he wasn't going to fly out to the game studio, so he recorded it in his mansion in the Bahamas? So it's like that. So he was probably over fucking Skype or something. Yeah. So it's like, was it because he didn't have the direction? Was it because it was like, you've got me for 6 hours? There's no time to reshoot anything. I do not know, but it's not good enough, and it's really sad because it genuinely
I signed my contract. I don't do reshoots.
It made the game unplayable.
Well, it just shows you the how on a knife edge using any Hollywood actors is, because I always like to put it on the what I now call the Lea Seydoux scale after Death Stranding, where she sounds like she's recording her lines in a hotel bathroom, like, you're right. It's just direction. He was obviously on a sun lounger in the Bahamas, and if anybody, there's long plays of the game on YouTube, and I would encourage anybody to go and have a look because it is really interesting, and it is sadly that bad.
Yeah. So speaking of Death Stranding, do we live in a universe where Jeff Keighley has done better video game acting than Sean Connery?
Yeah. It's really, it's so sad, especially because that was it for him in the role. And even when Bond had its 50th anniversary and all the actors turned up at the Oscars to be honoured, he didn't turn up. He was like, fuck this, I'm not doing it. So it was all of them except him. It was like he wouldn't have anything to do with the role except for this one thing, which somehow makes it even more painful. And it then just makes you think... It's really weird
that it was just this one thing. It makes you think that, I mean, aside from that bollocks about my grandchildren, like all that stuff, he just had a big bill to pay, surely.
But probably, he has said, his official reasoning when he did interviews and stuff was he said... it was two things. It was that From Russia with Love was his favourite film, and that his kids were big game players, and that was it. Probably, though, it's like when he was doing League of Extraordinary Gentlemen and stuff, he was probably just like, look, I'm fucking phoning it in.
His reasoning for doing League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is fascinating. I don't know if you've ever seen that interview, but he's like, well, I was offered The Matrix and I didn't understand it, so I turned it down. And
who the hell would he have been in The Matrix?
He was going to be Morpheus.
Fuck it.
He was going to be Morpheus in The Matrix opposite Will Smith as Neo. That was the original plan.
I know the Will Smith as Neo thing, but that's it's so sad because of his history with the role, and it's just like, I don't know why they didn't hear the recordings and go, you know what, we're going to recast, or hear the recordings and say, you know what, we're going to recast an ADR just the lines where he sounds his worst, so it's a mix of him and someone else, or why they didn't just say at the top, okay, we can't use We can't use Brosnan because he's on his way out.
Or they could
Why
have
don't
just fucking
use fucking Lazenby? Use who still sounds the same.
Yeah.
Roger Moore was still alive and sounded.
I mean,
better
having
and more
Lazenby
himself.
return to the role at all would have been as big a draw as like, oh, fucking Lazenby's back now, you know.
And Dalton sounds the same as well. He's like, when you watch him in stuff, when you watch him in like Hot Fuzz or whatever else, or when he was in Doctor Who, he sounds like his Bond still. So it's like he's one that could have done it.
Timothy Dalton is a Welsh actor who are known for their sustained quality.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
This podcast has gone way off. I can't believe I don't know how I've been on it. It's been JRPGs, which I hate. It had Doctor Who, I hate.
Yeah.
Kojima games, I hate. James Bond, I don't get. Like, why am I even on this?
All right, well, I've got to pick a winner out of all these. Fucking hell, Alex, once again, you've made an incredibly good pitch for that.
Are you
Let's
seriously going to go
let's
with a
go
PS2 action game?
Best game.
Yeah.
Best game. Like, listen.
Right.
I hate Final Fantasy.
I was going to say, you're
But
on
come
thin ice because your whole pitch is that you don't like Final Fantasy VII, which is off
the
brief.
best. It's not about what I like. It's about the best game that the millions of people adore. Like, honestly, like if this goes to Bond, there's
One thing
something-
I'll say about your pick, Tom, is that it's an urban legend, but I think there's probably some truth to it. Which says that basically when it came out in the States, Final Fantasy VII was the most returned game in history because a lot of people bought it. A lot of frat boys and they like bought it based on those TV ads, got 2 hours in and went, "What the fuck, man? Like, what is this?" Standing opposite each other, waiting for bars to fill up, and returned it. So I think whether it's for good or for ill, what you have picked is, I think, relatively, I wouldn't call it exactly common, but it wasn't uncommon back in the day. I think a lot of people were burned by those adverts and shocked. But then again, I think a lot of people, anyone who's a Bond fan, feels the same way roughly about Connery's performance, Connery's very sad performance in From Russia With Love. So.
And I do love that Persona 4 is a brilliant game. Aside from the trap that it set for people,
did you actually fall into the trap, James? That's the thing I forgot to ask.
Yes, I did.
And so, are you fucked enough you didn't have a save you could go back to or whatever?
So I was trying to work out like how old I was when I played it, and I think I was roughly at the sort of start of teens. So I was stupid enough to probably have not made a save. And so I think I did have to throw.
How far back would you have to go to fix that?
Literally 60, 70 hours.
Right.
If you didn't have a save, because Persona 4 has multiple save slots and it doesn't have an auto save, to be fair. So you have to reach that ending and then save over your file in order to fuck yourself completely.
Yeah, but you do that kind of stuff if you're 13, don't you?
Yeah.
You know what? I'm thinking about it, and I'm just so drawn to the tragic story of Sean Connery having his final turn in the iconic role that made him, and it being a massive disappointment, and what a terrible way to end your career. I mean, he already he decided he was quitting acting after League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, right? And like I say, he picked that project because he'd been offered a number of roles, and he read the script and he didn't understand it. He didn't understand the Matrix. He didn't understand something else, and his entire reasoning was, and I read League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and I also didn't understand it. And all the other things I turned down were massive hits, so I figured this one would be as well.
It is literally in his last 2 or 3 roles. So literally, he obviously did League of Extraordinary Gentlemen in 2003.
Yeah,
he did voiceovers for 1 TV show and 1 kids film and 1 documentary. So, and then he did From Russia With Love.
Yeah,
69 on Metacritic.
Yeah.
69.
It's a good game. You know what though, Tom? I think it's a good game. Like that and Everything or Nothing are great action games, and they should make a Bond.
Everything or Nothing is a good game.
Stop trying to find a loophole. Stop trying to find a loophole, Tom.
This is the same as Everything or Nothing.
I don't even like Persona, but I mean, James's choice is much better than this Bond game. I mean, come on.
Look, I'm gonna call it. All right, I'm gonna call it the best game that you. The best game that you hate for a very specific reason is From Russia with Love. I cannot resist that deep tragedy of Sean Connery being a shadow of the person he was when he first starred in that role. It's too good.
Well, at least it's
too
a good
beautiful.
headline. We've got Final Fantasy VII is worse than a PS2 action game. That's cool, yeah.
I mean, I think it is as well.
Yeah, I mean, I hate Final Fantasy VII. Like, literally, it's one of the worst games I've ever played.
Exactly.
So,
Yours doesn't even count.
I can't even bring myself to be angry about it anymore.
Like I said, you will find out in this here podcast.
If you enjoyed the show, please give us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast. It really helps us get the word out. We're not just a podcast, of course. If you'd like to hear more from the team, then check out VG247.com for our fantastic news coverage, features, reviews, and game guides. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye.